beginning of, or the early part of the Byzantine Empire. So the Byzantine Empire is the Roman Empire after it loses. It expanded, it's huge, it's powerful, but things in Italy and in Western Europe that were heavily controlled and kind of protected have gone into a bit of a decline. That's because a lot of people have moved over to Constantinople in the Byzantine Empire. So we're going to look at some things that happened. And so one of the things that's going to happen is we're going to still see Greco-Roman art qualities. We're also going to be thinking about those kind of late democratic imperial style qualities of short and stubby and less naturalism, because we're going to see those being transformed. We're also going to see kind of imagery that's associated with Greek and Roman gods and with emperors being transferred to Christ and images of Christ. So that's really key. I want you to be able to talk about that if that comes up on the test. All right, so what we're looking at right here, whoops, a little light, is this is a catacomb. The catacombs stretch for many, many miles under kind of the edge of the city of ancient Rome. There were these huge, massive cemeteries outside the city of Rome. People weren't allowed to bury their dead within the city because of contamination concerns. But what's interesting is that these are buried underground. And they're underground because they're under the city, so that's illegal. But they need a place to bury their dead. Oftentimes, these are people who have been enslaved or who were Christian, who were poor, and so they couldn't really buy a place to get buried. And so they're having these little cubiculums, these little tiny rooms. This is one of them, and it has these niches set out, and inside the niches, they would put the bones of the dead. Now, Christians, people who had converted to Christianity or who had all their lives been practicing Christianity, but it was still a relatively new religion, are the ones putting their dead here. It was very common for Romans to cremate the bodies of the dead. But in Christianity, there was a concern over preserving the bones of the body for the end times so that they could be reincarnated, so brought back to life, covered with flesh again. And so cremating them would supposedly make that very difficult. So they're burying their dead this way. And so you can see some of that. And we have this nice fresco on the wall. We can see it's kind of in a Greco-Roman style. It's not fancy, but they've done a lot of painting in here. It has a fair degree of naturalism. I want you to notice the sheep. And then I want you to notice this guy right here in the center of this cubiculum. This is Christ as the Good Shepherd. And he has the sheep at his feet, and he has a sheep up on his shoulders. And so Christ says in the Bible some variation of this, so you can see that a little better. I know it's really hard. So here's his head. Here's the head of the sheep. Here's the back end of the sheep. Here's his leg. This arm's holding the sheep. He basically says, those sheep who stay with me, I don't need to worry about them. I'm going to spend my energy going to recover the lost sheep, the person who needs my help. Everybody else will take care of each other. So we see this kind of idea of Christ going and doing something to bring someone back into the community. But aside from the fact that he's a shepherd, he's also based on the symbolism of the god Apollo, who was this Greek god. We talked about him on the Mount. Remember, he was a god of prophecy. He was also a god of shepherds, and he was a god of music and poetry, because the shepherd had to do something to entertain himself while he's out watching the sheep, and that would be write poetry and make music. So he would often be depicted out in the countryside, often with a flute. He sometimes have like a star over his head, but often he's just a young man with golden hair to kind of indicate that he is Apollo, that that's the sun. And he has no beard. So that's Apollo, but it's also these Christian people commission an artist to make a representation of Jesus Christ. No one knew what Jesus Christ looked like. That was lost. So they have to imagine who it could look like. And so it's reasonable for the artist to say, what about Apollo? See, young guy. And the sheep is a great connection. So we'll do Apollo. So you see these kind of representations of that happening. We've got some other interesting things over here. Here we can see the Leviathan about to eat Jonah, and here he gets spit back out. Okay, now other ways of representing Christ went in a political rather than a religious direction. And that's what we see here. We've got, what style would you say this is? So we're looking for period style. What was that? It is not Hellenistic. He has some qualities of Hellenistic with his drapery folds. Anybody else? He is Roman Imperial, but he's a special kind of Roman Imperial. Check out the lengths of his arm and his legs and the size of his head.
Oh, it's the blocky one.
Late democratic, imperial style, short and stubby. Of course, he's lost part of his foot over here, but we can see we've got a fair degree of naturalism right here. Notice that he's seated. He has a scroll in his hand. That's the thing. And over here, this arm, his right hand, is almost always shown in a sign of blessing. He's making the sign of the blessing, but that arm's been broken off and lost. And he's seated. And what he's represented here as when he's seated is the Roman emperor inside a basilica courthouse. So, judging souls, just like the emperor judged law cases. Okay, so now we're going to look at one of the things that happens. After Constantine leaves behind the city of Rome and he goes to build the city of Constantinople, right as that's happening, he grants land and money to the Christians in the city to go ahead and build their first official church. And so he gives them a lot of money for that, and he gives them the land, and the land is sacred because this is where St. Peter, who was the apostle that Christ basically said, you will lead the church after I am gone. You will lead this faith after I'm gone. And so St. Peter goes to Rome, and he tries to found a church in Rome, and he is put to death. And he says, don't crucify me like you crucified Christ, because I'm not as good as he was. So the Roman soldiers said, what do you want us to do? We're going to kill you. And he says, crucify me upside down. So anyway, this is the church that they build on the site. And this is actually based on the basilica that Constantine redesigned. So what we've got here is a kind of Christian architecture that's made as a church, not a law court, but it's following the basic design, except they don't have all the money that the Romans had. The Romans could use concrete and they could decorate that building with these lovely, lovely, beautiful stones and cladding, and they have brick. But they have a big central aisle. They don't have any barrel vaults, so we've got flat roofs, and they have side aisles over here, and you can see from one side to the other. And then the other thing that they do is they let in light from the top. This is called a clear story, C-L-E-R-E. It's French, but it means clear story. And it just means that there's windows above the roof on the sides to let light in to the main section. So these windows are partly blocked. Do you see that by the roof? But still, some light's going to come in and light up this space into the building. This one right here, this section, this big central section is called the nave. And this is where most of the people would sit. It also had this section right here, which is called the narthex. It's like a big covered patio on the sides to give people protection from shade. And this was huge. This was monumental. It stayed that way. We only have drawings of it because guess what? In the around the 1300s to 1400s, it started to get a little bulge in its wall, and that was bad. And so they realized that they can't fix it, they need to rebuild it. So they tore it down, and it took them a very long time to go ahead and rebuild the new version of St. Peter's, which is what we see today. Here is the Roman basilica it was based on. And here is the image, the sculpture of the emperor sitting in judgment over law cases. And notice the clear stories up there. Okay, this is an example of what a church from that time in Rome looked like. It's pretty, it's decorative, it's not that big. And this area right here is called a half dome. And that half dome is the end of the church. This is where the altar is, right here, this blue area. And that is where the wafer and wine are transformed into the blood and the body of Christ for High Holy Mass. Okay, so we have the Basilican plan. That's that whole church we just looked at, that was the Basilican plan. It's based on the Basilica Law Court. So what a transformation. And one of the things I want you to notice is this is now congregational architecture. None of this stuff about, hey, ordinary people can't go in there. Now people are expected to go in. They're expected to listen to sermons. They're expected to interact with each other and in that gathering have a closer connection to God. This rips across the Mediterranean. It's going to take over all the big religions. They're all going to become congregational. The idea of the temple as the God's home has come to an end. Now we're looking here at a mausoleum. It's probably the mausoleum of one of Constantine's sons, although it's described as his daughter. And this has a circular area. And we can see that we have side aisles, but the side aisles around the circle mean that you have a ring going around the outside. So this would be a place of prayer, but it gets turned into a chapel, which is like a little church. It doesn't have full services, but prayers can be made there. And here we can see the outside of it. So with this one, we have a central plan instead of a basilican plan. And central plan means that it's kind of even on all sides. So we could start with the circle, which was considered a perfect form. We can put up a square, because if we take a square, we could draw a circle that touches each side of the square perfectly. So the square is also a perfect form. It's not as perfect as the circle, which has a radii that's the same in all directions. But it's pretty close. You could also put an equilateral triangle around one of these perfect circles. This was associated with Plato's theories from ancient Greece, so Greek philosophical theories about perfection. And remember that we saw the Pantheon in Rome, and it is the circle as well. So we've got this long connection with this kind of central plan design. Okay, so we are now looking at a mosaic, and this is showing Christ in this early period. This is showing Christ as Apollo again. He is an aspect of Apollo. He's called Sol Invictus, so he is like the Roman emperors. So do you remember Christianity comes from Judaism. Judaism denied the reality of the Roman emperors becoming gods, and now here is Christ represented as the same kind of God, the same God. Here is another mausoleum. If you look at it, we have what's called a Greek cross. Greek crosses have equal arms to them instead of a long rectangular cross. So would this be central plan or basilican plan? This is a central plan. Okay, now we're looking at another example. This is inside, showing us Christ as the Good Shepherd. It's a mosaic. We've got tesserae here. Isn't it beautiful? One of the things I want you to notice is gold is showing up everywhere. So we're now entering kind of the Byzantine era, and with the arrival of the Byzantine, we're getting gold. Gold is like this sacred material because it never tarnishes. Unlike all the other metals that get dull or darken or change color, this one stays gleaming gold. So it's seen as being perfect like God. I want you to check out the tails of the sheep. Aren't they cute?
Oh,
Have you ever seen sheep with tails?
no.
You have.
Well, yeah.
Oh, it was a really young sheep that we had gotten from a farm.
We removed their tails, but they didn't then. The reason why we removed their tails, do you know why we removed their tails?
Isn't it that the tails can hurt them if they get disease?
They get flies that lay their eggs in their tail,
Oof.
and it can get into the spine, and it's bad.
Yeah. Ooh.
Particularly in the United States, North America, so we don't have pretty sheep. Okay, so this was made, the patron of this one shows this Emperor Justinian as an amazing person. He's got a victory down here with a Mother Earth joined together. He's got victories up here, more victories around him. Here he is shown holding a victory, and these are all the kind of lands that are under his control as the Byzantine emperor, bringing their wealth in to the emperor. And you can see by their clothes that they're each coming from a distinct area. So I think this one is Scotland coming in, and he's wearing like a tartan. So what is this about? Well, this was commissioned. This is like a tablet cover, and it's not very big. And we have that late Roman democratic style, short and stubby. But we still have a lot of the Greek naturalism coming into this. And this was commissioned by one sister who killed her sister, had her sister's husband killed, and the sister wants to kill her, and they're fighting for political power, and so she's trying to kind of petition the Roman emperor or the Byzantine emperor to respect her requests and let her succeed in her efforts to take political control in a region of the empire. This panel was lost, and that's just a filled-in area to show there was something there, but we don't know what it was. Okay, so that guy's name was Justinian. And so we get to the story of this big, beautiful church. Justinian, like all of the Byzantine emperors, was both head of the Christian church and head of the empire. So joining the church and the political side together. And he also has a guy who's in charge of the church because he can't do it all. But when he says something, it happens. And so he says, we're going to build a grand and wonderful church that will be even better than the Pantheon in Rome. But we're going to take the idea of the Pantheon and push it up to the limits. And so we are looking inside, standing at this. If you're looking at it and saying, that's Arabic, you're right, because this is a mosque now. But this was this church that was meant to merge the Basilican plan with the central plan on a huge scale to be bigger and grander than St. Peter's because it's imperial, and to be better than the Pantheon. So we can see this is the main central dome. It doesn't have a hole in the top with the oculus. It has a ring of windows around it. That weakens that dome. It weakened the dome so much that dome fell down.
Oh no.
They had to rebuild it better, stronger, and faster than they did it before. To keep this from falling, they have a half dome pushing against it, using all those compressed forces that domes and half domes have to push against this dome and hold it up. And it is in turn supported by 3 half domes. They're doing that same pressing and tensioning the whole structure to keep it up. So it's a very complicated and elaborate structure. It's decorated with gold mosaic in it. It had a lot of Christian imagery that in the main building have been kind of replaced as it became a mosque. But when you go down into the lower levels, a lot of those are still there. Okay, So why does it happen? Well, one of the things that happens is the Nika revolt. And the Nika revolt causes Justinian some problems. So basically, he is taxing the people heavily so that he can build this amazing church. And they can't support it. And so there is a riot and a lot of people got involved. It starts out between these two chariot teams, the blues and the greens. But then the greens seem to come to be associated with the people who are resisting paying all the taxes. Now, we don't know if that's true. All we know is that Justinian and his wife plotted to pay the blues to kill them and turn it into a massive riot, and then claim that they were undermining the whole thing. How did this come about? Well, you've already heard that the taxes are oppressive and people are overwhelmed. They are kind of starving. So when Justinian's minions come in, they say basically, Emperor, run for your life. We're going to lose everything. There's nothing we can do to control the riots. And he starts packing up. He's like, okay, I'm better alive than dead. So he starts to pack up. And Theodora comes in, his wife. And Theodora, which means gift of God, had been a circus acrobat. She was not going to give up becoming an empress. He had married a woman who was considered unclean and impure because circus acrobats were women performing in public. There's no way they couldn't be sexually dirty. But he falls in love with her. They get married. And she's like, I'm not giving this up. No way. We're going to hire the blues to kill him and riot on our behalf. And it works. She saves the empire. Of course, it's kind of gruesome and horrible, but she lived until she got cancer and died shortly afterwards.
Oh.
That's another part of the story. Here's what we see outside the building and how it works. These are later additions once it becomes a mosque. So these are to call people to prayer. We're going to focus on the main structure of the church. Here is the ring. When they first built it, they didn't have all this buttressing for the windows. So without that buttressing and without the buttresses of the domes, that's when it fell. Pretty catastrophic. And this was supposed to have light shining in these windows that transcended anything that happened in the Pantheon. It was meant to be a congregational building, and the emperor got to sit on the second floor alone and look down on the sermons that were happening beneath. Here's what it looks like cut away. Another view showing us that beautiful central dome and the supporting half dome over here. And the elaborate stonework all over the place. So they built this dome up with pendentives. So they're having to come up. So when they built the Pantheon, they built the drum. It's this cylinder, and they put the dome on top of it. But here, they're trying to immerse it into the rest of the building and make the building a space for congregations. So they need to turn it into a sort of rectangle. And to do that, they need to support that dome separately without filling up all the space. So they come up with this idea. You make a set of 4 arches in a square, and then you create this curved space right here that transitions from where these 2 flat sides come together to a curve that holds this up. It's hard to build, it's pretty, it's wonderful. But it's nice. Later on, they're going to invent squinches. Squinches, they say, let's just build a square, and we're going to let plastic on top of this square, and then we're going to smooth that out on the sides and make it look like it's a circle. And this is the floor plan of what it looks like. Look at all these entrances to get into it. Here's the apse right here. Pretty grand. And a view of that clear story under the dome. Okay, look at these mosaics. Here's Christ, with the sign of the blessing. Here's the Virgin Mary with Christ, getting ready to do the sign of the blessing. Here's Justinian and another emperor who built churches and dedicated them to Christ. This is Justinian over here, bringing in Hagia Sophia. Hagia Sophia means holy wisdom, so this is the Church of the Holy Wisdom. when Constantine has power, he decides that he's going to require everybody within the empire to become Christian. Unfortunately, this is going to cause some problems on the edges of the empire because some people don't want to become Christian. And so this is going to be especially true on the Arabian Peninsula. He's trying to take more political control over the area. They have control of trade routes coming from China and India. He's going to force these people to be Christian. He doesn't try to lure them into being Christianity either. He tells his military forces to go in and tell them that they're Christian now, and if they don't start being Christian, then they will set their villages on fire.
Wow.
Went over well. You can see why Islam might be kind of a popular counter religion in just a few hundred years. So, meanwhile, back in Rome, they're having a problem. You've probably heard about the fall of Rome when the Germanic forces come in. They're coming in because there's now a power vacuum in the city of Rome. Because you want to know who the Roman consul is, the little emperor who's supposed to be taking care of Rome? He's a 17-year-old boy. He is so far away from all the political power and all the military might that is now in Constantinople. There's nobody to protect him in any real and meaningful way. So Alaric comes in and basically takes control and says, hey, I'm going to be your brother-in-law because I'm going to marry your sister. And this young emperor is like writing letters off to Constantinople saying, help me, help me. And they're like, we'd love to help you, but there's really not much we can do. It would take us a year to march all the way back. So we're going to build a church for you to show that we are there. But they're no longer in Rome because he had to flee Rome. So he's now in the last outpost of the Roman Empire. It's in the north and it's in a city called Ravenna. And so this is this big, elaborate, beautiful mosaic that we see in Ravenna in the Church of San Vitale. And I want you to notice, we've gone from short and squat with the democratic imperial style of Rome to now we have elongated figures with a gold background. They're heavenly. Notice how their feet kind of dangle a little bit. They're very thin and they're covered with robes. Here is Justinian. He's carrying a bowl to contain the sacrificial wafers of High Holy Mass, sanctified and sacrificial. Here is the bishop right beside him. Here are members of his court. Here are his military soldiers. And look, they have the Chi Rho on the shield. That is now an XP. Across the way in this church, check this out, is Theodora with her attendants. She's bringing in a chalice. Now, they look like they're wearing kind of black and gray, she and the emperor. That was purple. It just hasn't aged well. That was the color that the Roman imperial family wore to show their status. They wiped out a whole species of shellfish, almost completely, in order to get the dye from those little shells to make the purple color. And it would range from a purple, a dark purple, to a kind of magenta color. And notice they have kind of the same quality. They're elongated, their eyes are big, so that's coming from the late democratic imperial style. But they're becoming heavenly. Here is the holy water, and she's about to step inside this space. All right, just want to show you, we have, this is San Vitale, the church that's in, and look, it's a central plan building. Here's what it looks like. They built it on an angle because it had to fit between two streets. So this is the apse down here with towers to help support it. And this is the front entrance. And if you entered right here, you could walk straight into the church and see down to the apse. You walk in over here, you have to turn to see it. Central plan is lovely and filled with symbolic things, but it's very difficult to make it work as a congregational space. Here's what it looked like inside. And here in another Ravenna church, we see another one of these elaborate mosaics. Here Christ is seated on the globe of the world like emperors were sometimes shown. Again, he is reaching out to show, he's not using the I speak, he's using either the gesture of blessing or the gesture of bringing information to the people about the faith. Okay, so that does that. And now, how much time do we have? We have plenty of time. So what I'm going to have you do now is I'm going to have you form groups near where you are, and you're going to look at that downloadable vocab sheet. And working in your group, you're going to come up with examples that demonstrate those vocab terms.